My husband's ex-wife acts like she is still his wife. I decided to teach her what being divorced actually meant. My husband Robert's ex-wife Diana still acted like she was married to him, even though they'd been divorced for 3 years before I met him. She had a key to his house that she refused to return and would let herself in whenever she wanted. She'd rearrange his furniture, do his laundry, and stock his fridge with food she thought he should eat. When Robert and I got married in January, Diana showed up to the ceremony wearing a white dress and sat in the front row where the mother of the groom should sit. She told everyone she was there to support Robert during this difficult transition, and that she'd always be his first and real wife. She actually stood up during the ceremony when the officiant asked if anyone objected, and said she just wanted to remind Robert that their vows were forever, even if the law said otherwise. Robert told her to sit down and be quiet, but she spent the rest of the ceremony crying loudly and telling people around her about their wedding 15 years ago. At our reception, Diana gave a speech no one asked for about how she'd shaped Robert into the man he was today, and I should be grateful for all her hard work preparing him for me. She said she'd always be part of his life and hoped I understood that some bonds couldn't be broken by paperwork. She actually thanked me for taking care of her husband temporarily while she focused on herself. I was too shocked to respond, and Robert just looked embarrassed but didn't stop her from talking. The day after we got back from our honeymoon, Diana was in our kitchen making breakfast. She said she knew Robert liked eggs over easy on Sundays, and I probably didn't know that yet. She'd used her key while we were gone to clean the house and had thrown away all my things that she deemed inappropriate for Robert's home. She said Robert had specific standards that she'd maintained for 15 years and she'd help me learn them. When I told her to leave immediately and give me her key, she laughed and said Robert had given her that key, and only he could ask for it back. Robert came downstairs, and instead of demanding the key, he just asked Diana to call before coming over next time. She said she'd been coming over for 3 years without calling and didn't see why that should change just because I lived there now. Robert actually told me that Diana meant well, and was just having trouble adjusting to the changes. Diana started showing up every morning to make Robert lunch for work, because she said he'd never eaten properly without her guidance. She'd walk into our bedroom while we were still in bed to ask what he wanted for dinner. She told everyone in the neighborhood that she was training me to take care of Robert properly, since being his wife was a full-time job that required experience. She even called herself to our mail as Diana Wheeler Roberts, even though she'd legally gone back to her maiden name Jameson after the divorce. When packages arrived for Mrs. Roberts, she'd claim them saying she was the original Mrs. Roberts and always would be. She joined our gym and scheduled her workouts for the same time as Roberts, saying they'd been workout partners for years and divorce didn't change that. She'd follow us to restaurants and get a table nearby to supervise our dates. She told the servers that she was Robert's life partner, and I was just the current legal wife. She'd send food to our table that she'd ordered because she knew what Robert really wanted better than he did. The breaking point came when Diana threw herself a 15th anniversary party for her and Robert's defunct marriage. She sent invitations to all their old friends saying she was celebrating their enduring bond that transcended legal status. She'd rented a venue and hired a band and expected Robert to attend as her date. She told me I could come as a guest if I wanted to see how real marriages were celebrated. That's when I decided Diana needed to learn what being divorced actually meant. I started by changing all the locks on our house and installing a security system that would alert police if she tried to enter. When Diana showed up with her key the next morning, she couldn't get in and had to stand outside ringing the doorbell. I answered in my robe and told her Robert was busy with his wife, and she'd need to make an appointment if she wanted to see him. I then called every vendor for her anniversary party and canceled everything, explaining that Diana was confused and thought she was still married to my husband. The venue was sympathetic and refunded her deposit to Robert since she'd used his credit card without permission. The band was horrified to learn they'd been hired for a divorced woman's fake anniversary and agreed to cancel. I sent messages to everyone invited explaining that Diana was having difficulty accepting the divorce, and we were concerned about her mental state. Next, I went to the gym and changed Robert's membership to a different location, telling them his ex-wife was stalking him. They banned Diana from all their facilities for harassment. I did the same at every restaurant we frequented, explaining that his ex-wife was following us and disrupting our meals. They all put her photo on their do not serve lists. The real consequence came when I contacted Diana's boyfriend that she'd been dating for 6 months. I found his number through mutual friends and called him that evening. He answered on the third ring, and I introduced myself as Robert's wife. There was a pause before he said he knew who I was because Diana had mentioned me a few times. I took a breath and told him I needed to talk to him about Diana's behavior, because he deserved to know what was really going on. I explained everything. How she'd been letting herself into our house with her key for months even after we got married. How she made Robert's lunches every morning and walked into our bedroom while we were still in bed. How she threw herself a 15th anniversary party for her marriage to my husband that ended 3 years before I even met him. How she followed us to restaurants and told servers she was Robert's real-life partner. how she used mail with a hyphenated name even though she'd legally changed it back after the divorce. He went completely silent. I counted the seconds in my head and got to 30 before he spoke again. His voice was different now, tight and controlled. He asked if I had any proof of what I was saying. I told him I'd send it right away and asked for his email. He gave it to me, and I heard him breathing on the other end of the line while I pulled up my phone and started attaching files. I sent photos of the mail addressed to Diana Wheeler Roberts. Screenshots of the anniversary party invitation with its language about their enduring bond that transcended legal status. Photos I'd taken of her standing in our kitchen that Sunday morning after the honeymoon. Documentation from the gym about changing Robert's membership because of her stalking. Emails from the restaurants confirming they'd banned her. Credit card statements showing she'd charged thousands of dollars for the party venue and banned to Robert's card without permission. I heard his phone ping as the email arrived. He said he'd look at everything and call me back. The line went dead. 2 hours passed. I sat on the couch with my phone in my lap while Robert made dinner. He asked what I was doing, and I told him I'd contacted Diana's boyfriend. His face went pale, and he asked why I would do that. I said because Diana had been lying to both of us, and her boyfriend deserved to know the truth about who he was dating. Robert looked like he wanted to argue but didn't know what to say. My phone rang. I answered, and Diana's boyfriend started talking immediately. His voice shook with anger. He said he'd looked at everything I sent, and he had no idea any of this was happening. He thought Diana was over her ex-husband. He thought she was ready to move forward with her life and build something new with him. But now he realized she'd been lying to him for their entire 6-month relationship. Every time she said she was running errands, she was probably at our house. Every time she said she was meeting a friend, she was probably following us to restaurants. Every time she talked about her past marriage like it was ancient history, she was planning anniversary parties and using hyphenated names. He said he felt like an idiot for not seeing it. I told him he wasn't an idiot and Diana was good at hiding things. He said he was going to confront her tonight. He thanked me for telling him the truth even though it clearly hurt him to hear it. Then he hung up. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when the security system alert went off on my phone. I pulled it up and saw Diana on the camera feed walking up our driveway. She reached the porch and started pounding on the door with both fists. I turned up the volume on my phone and heard her screaming. She yelled that I'd ruined her life, that I'd destroyed her relationship, that I had no right to interfere in things I didn't understand. She demanded that Robert come out and explain why he was letting me do this to her. Her face was red and her hair was messy like she hadn't slept. Robert came downstairs and stood beside me looking at the phone screen. His mouth hung open. I called the police non-emergency line while Diana kept pounding. The operator answered, and I explained that my husband's ex-wife was at our house refusing to leave, and we had a security system recording everything. The operator said they'd send an officer to document the incident. Diana screamed for another 5 minutes before she finally stopped and walked back to her car. Robert just stared at the screen. He said he'd never seen her like that before. I said that's because he'd never told her no before. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman's voice said this was Natalie, Robert's sister. My stomach dropped. She said Diana had contacted her that morning claiming I was abusing Robert and isolating him from people who cared about him. Natalie said Diana was very upset and very convincing. I asked Natalie if she wanted to come over and see the truth for herself. There was a pause. Then she said yes, she'd like that. She arrived an hour later with her husband Dimitri. I invited them in, and Robert looked surprised to see them. Natalie hugged her brother and asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. I pulled out my laptop and opened all the folders I'd been keeping. I showed them everything. Photos of Diana in our house that first Sunday after the honeymoon. Screenshots of her text to Robert asking what he wanted for dinner. The anniversary party invitation. The credit card statements. Documentation of every gym visit where she'd shown up at the same time as Robert. Photos of her sitting at nearby tables during our restaurant dates. The mail with the hyphenated name. Natalie's face changed as she scrolled through everything. She put her hand over her mouth. Dimitri leaned over her shoulder and his jaw tightened. Natalie looked at Robert and asked why he never told her any of this. Robert shrugged and said he didn't want to cause problems. Natalie said this was a huge problem and he should have said something years ago. She turned to me and apologized. She said Diana had always seemed a bit possessive, but she had no idea it was this extreme. She said if she'd known, she would have stepped in sooner. Natalie and Dimitri stayed for dinner. Dimitri talked to Robert in the living room while Natalie helped me cook. I could hear Dimitri's voice through the wall. He told Robert that his passivity had enabled Diana's delusions and put our marriage at risk. He said no real friend would accept this behavior from an ex-spouse. He said protecting me should be Robert's first priority, not avoiding conflict with Diana. Robert's voice was quiet when he responded. He said he knew. He said he was so used to Diana's controlling behavior from their marriage that he didn't know how to stop it. He said when they were married, Diana made all the decisions, and he just went along with everything because it was easier than arguing. He said after the divorce he felt guilty because Diana didn't want to end the marriage, and he did. So when she kept coming around, he told himself she just needed time to adjust. But now he saw that he'd made everything worse by not setting boundaries. Dimitri said Robert needed to change that starting now. Robert said he was ready. 3 days later, Robert came home from work looking shaken. He said Diana had shown up at his office that afternoon crying. She'd gone to his coworkers and told them I'd turned him against her and stolen her life partner. She said I was controlling and manipulative and they needed to help Robert see what was happening. His boss had called him in to discuss the situation. Robert said his boss was concerned about the disruption and asked what was going on. Robert finally stood up for himself. He explained that Diana was his ex-wife who wouldn't accept the divorce. He said she'd been harassing us for months and we were taking legal action. His boss was sympathetic. He said he'd had no idea Robert was dealing with this. He called security and had them escort Diana out of the building. He told security that Diana was not welcome on the property, and if she came back, they should call the police. Robert said it felt good to finally say it out loud to someone besides me. I scheduled a meeting with Jeffrey Lawson the next week. He was an attorney who specialized in harassment and restraining orders. I brought 3 folders full of documentation. Photos, screenshots, credit card statements, police reports from the morning Diana showed up screaming, statements from the gym and restaurants, everything. Jeffrey spread it all out on his desk and went through each piece carefully. He asked questions about the timeline and took notes. After an hour, he sat back and said we had an extremely strong case for a restraining order. He said the trespassing alone was enough, but combined with the stalking, credit card fraud, and continued harassment after being told to stop, a judge would definitely grant the order. He explained the process would take a few weeks. We'd file the petition, Diana would be served with a temporary order and court date. Then we'd have a hearing where both sides could present evidence. He said I should keep documenting every contact attempt Diana made between now and the hearing. Every call, every text, every time she showed up somewhere we were. He said the more evidence we had of ongoing harassment, the stronger our case would be. 2 days after our meeting with Jeffrey, Robert's phone rang with Diana's boyfriend's number. Robert answered on speaker. The boyfriend said he wanted to apologize for not seeing what was happening sooner. He said he'd ended things with Diana completely. Robert asked what happened when he confronted her. The boyfriend said Diana had a complete breakdown. She insisted that her marriage to Robert was her real relationship and always would be. She said the boyfriend was just someone to pass time with until Robert came to his senses and realized they belonged together. She said their divorce was just a temporary setback, and eventually Robert would understand that their bond was forever. The boyfriend said he felt used and manipulated. He said he'd wasted 6 months of his life on someone who was never really present in their relationship. He said he understood now why we had to take such drastic action, and he didn't blame us. Robert thanked him, and they hung up. Natalie called that evening and said she and Dimitri thought Robert should see a therapist. She said what happened with Diana wasn't normal, and Robert needed help learning to set boundaries. Robert agreed. Natalie recommended Roxana Cheney, a therapist who specialized in codependency and boundary issues. Robert called and made an appointment for the following week. After his first session, he came home and sat on the couch for a long time without saying anything. I asked how it went. He said it was hard. Roxana had asked him to talk about his marriage to Diana, and he realized how much he'd let her control everything. She made all their decisions about where to live, what to eat, how to spend money, who to be friends with. He said he'd been so conflict avoidant that he just went along with whatever Diana wanted because fighting exhausted him. Roxana helped him see that his guilt about the divorce made him enable Diana's intrusions for 3 years. She said being kind didn't mean accepting abuse. She said protecting our marriage would require him to be uncomfortable sometimes, but that discomfort was necessary for growth. Robert said he was starting to understand that. Over the next week, Diana tried a new approach. She contacted mutual friends and told them elaborate stories about how I was controlling and abusive. She said I was keeping Robert prisoner in his own home. She said I'd isolated him from everyone who cared about him. She said Robert was too scared of me to ask for help, but she knew he needed rescuing. But Natalie had already reached out to these friends with the truth. She'd shared some of the documentation with their permission. Most of them were horrified by Diana's behavior. They said they'd always thought Diana's attachment to Robert was a bit much, but they didn't want to get involved in divorce drama. Now they felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. 2 friends called Robert directly to apologize and offer support. They said if Diana tried to contact them again, they'd tell her to leave them alone. One friend said she'd actually witnessed Diana following us to a restaurant months ago, but convinced herself it was just a coincidence. Now she realized it was part of a pattern and she felt terrible for not saying something. I checked the mail every day after that, waiting for news from the credit card company. Robert had filed a fraud claim the same day I canceled Diana's party, and the investigation took almost 3 weeks. The letter finally arrived on a Tuesday morning. I opened it right there at the mailbox and read that they'd ruled in our favor. They refunded every single charge Diana made for the anniversary party and flagged her account for fraud. The letter said they were sending Diana a separate notice demanding repayment within 30 days and threatening legal action if she didn't comply. I called Robert at work immediately to tell him. He sounded relieved but also worried about how Diana would react. I reminded him that she'd committed fraud by using his card without permission, and these were just the natural consequences of her actions. That evening, I checked our credit card statement online and saw all the charges reversed. Diana had spent over $4,000 on the venue, band, catering, decorations, and a photographer for her delusional celebration. Seeing that money back in our account felt like a small victory, but I knew the real impact would be on Diana when she got her letter demanding repayment. Robert came home from therapy the next week looking different. He sat down at the kitchen table and just stared at his hands for a long time before he started talking. He said Roxana had pushed him hard that session, asking him to really examine why he stayed married to Diana for so long when he was clearly unhappy. He admitted that he stayed years longer than he should have because he was afraid of her reactions and wanted to avoid conflict. He said Diana would cry and threaten to hurt herself whenever he tried to set boundaries, and he always backed down because dealing with her emotions felt impossible. Roxana helped him see that this same pattern continued after the divorce. Diana learned she could manipulate him through tears and guilt, and he let her because it was easier than standing firm. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and apologized properly for the first time. He said his passivity put me in an impossible situation, and he was sorry for not protecting our marriage from the beginning. He said he understood now that being uncomfortable was necessary, and he was committed to doing better. I reached across the table and held his hand. I told him I appreciated the apology, and I was proud of him for doing this work. We sat there together for a while, not saying anything, just being present with each other in a way that felt new and solid. The 10-page letter from Diana arrived 4 days later. I found it in the mailbox when I got home from work, addressed to both of us in Diana's handwriting. I opened it standing right there in the driveway because I knew Robert would want to see it too. The letter was completely unhinged. It alternated between begging Robert to remember their love and threatening to make our lives miserable if we didn't let her back in. She wrote paragraphs about their wedding day and their first apartment and trips they took together. Then she'd switched to saying I was a temporary obstacle, and our marriage was just a karmic lesson Robert needed to learn before returning to her. She actually used the phrase twin flames and said their souls were connected across lifetimes. She said she'd been patient while Robert explored this phase with me, but her patience was running out. She wrote that she knew Robert still loved her because you can't just stop loving your soulmate. The last page was almost scary. She said if we continued to shut her out, she'd make sure we regretted it. She said she had ways of making our lives difficult that we couldn't even imagine. She said Robert belonged to her and always would, no matter what any court or marriage certificate said. I took photos of every page with my phone and texted them to Jeffrey immediately. He called me back within an hour. He said the letter was perfect for our restraining order case because it showed Diana's complete inability to accept reality. He said the threats at the end were particularly helpful because they demonstrated she posed a genuine risk to our safety. He told me to keep the original letter in a safe place and not to respond to Diana in any way. Jeffrey helped us file for the restraining order 2 days later. We met him at his office and went through all the documentation we'd collected over the past months. He'd organized everything into a timeline showing Diana's pattern of boundary violations over 3 years. We had photos of her at our wedding in the white dress, screenshots of the anniversary party invitation, documentation from the gym, and restaurants where she'd been banned, the credit card fraud evidence, witness statements from Robert's co-workers about her workplace disruption, and now the 10-page letter with its threats. Jeffrey said it was one of the strongest harassment cases he'd seen. We filled out all the paperwork, and Jeffrey filed it with the court that afternoon. The temporary restraining order was granted immediately, and a process server was assigned to deliver it to Diana at her apartment, along with the court date for the permanent order hearing. Jeffrey called us that evening to say Diana had been served. The process server reported that she became hysterical when she read the papers. She kept saying there must be a mistake because you can't get a restraining order against someone who's family. She insisted she and Robert were still connected by their marriage vows, and no court could change that. The server said she was still crying and arguing when he left. The temporary order prohibited Diana from coming within 500 feet of our home, Robert's workplace, or any location where she knew we'd be. It also banned all contact, direct or indirect, until the court hearing in 3 weeks. Natalie called the next morning and said she and Dimitri wanted to come to the hearing with us for support. I told her that meant a lot and we'd appreciate having them there. Robert's boss also offered to provide a written statement about Diana's workplace disruption and how it had affected the office. Jeffrey said these additional witnesses would strengthen our case. Over the next 2 weeks, Jeffrey prepared his presentation. He created a comprehensive timeline of Diana's 3-year pattern of boundary violations with dates, times, and specific incidents. He organized all the witness statements, photos, and documentation into a binder. He prepared questions for Robert and me to answer on the stand. He coached us on how to stay calm and factual even if Diana said upsetting things. I was nervous about facing Diana in court, but I was also determined to see this through. We'd come too far to back down now. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Diana and how she'd react to losing in court. Part of me felt bad for her because she clearly had serious problems accepting reality. But a bigger part of me knew these consequences were necessary and long overdue. The courthouse was busy when we arrived on the morning of the hearing. Natalie and Dimitri met us in the lobby, and we all went through security together. Jeffrey was already inside the courtroom reviewing his notes. We took seats behind the table where Jeffrey had set up his materials. The courtroom slowly filled with other people waiting for their cases. Then Diana walked in, and I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was wearing the same white dress from our wedding ceremony, the exact same dress. She'd done her hair and makeup like she was attending a special occasion. She walked to the other side of the courtroom and sat down alone because she'd decided to represent herself. She kept staring at Robert with this sad smile like they were sharing some private moment. Robert looked straight ahead and didn't acknowledge her. The judge came in and called our case. Jeffrey stood up and began his presentation. He walked the judge through the 3-year timeline of Diana's behavior, showing how it escalated after Robert remarried. He presented the photos, the witness statements, the credit card fraud evidence, and the threatening letter. He called Robert to the stand first. Robert testified about finding Diana in his house after their divorce, her refusal to return the key, her constant intrusions, and her appearance at our wedding. His voice was steady, and he stuck to the facts, just like Jeffrey had coached him. Then Jeffrey called me to the stand. I described Diana's behavior toward me, her claims of being Robert's real wife, her stalking at restaurants and the gym, and the anniversary party she planned for their defunct marriage. I showed the judge photos on my phone of Diana at our wedding reception giving her uninvited speech. Then it was Diana's turn. She stood up and approached the judge without any notes or preparation. She started talking about her 15-year marriage to Robert and how they'd built a life together. She said their bond was spiritual and transcended legal paperwork. She said she had a right to maintain contact with Robert because of their deep connection. She actually used the phrase soulmate and twin flame multiple times. The judge listened patiently, but I could see his expression changing as Diana talked. She kept referring to me as the temporary wife and saying that Robert would eventually realize his mistake and come back to her. She said their love was eternal, and no restraining order could break their spiritual connection. She started crying and telling stories about their marriage like she was at a therapy session instead of a court hearing. The judge finally interrupted her and asked if she understood that she and Robert were legally divorced. Diana said yes, but that divorce was just a legal formality and didn't reflect their true relationship. The judge asked if she understood that Robert had remarried, and Diana said yes, but that I was just a phase Robert needed to go through. The judge's face got very serious. He asked Diana directly if she believed Robert wanted contact with her. Diana said she knew Robert loved her even if he was confused right now. The judge asked if she'd read the restraining order petition where Robert explicitly stated he wanted no contact with her. Diana said Robert was influenced by me and didn't know what he really wanted. The judge announced his decision without even taking a break to deliberate. He said he was granting a 3-year restraining order with very specific terms. Diana could not contact Robert or me directly, or through third parties. She could not come within 500 feet of our home, our workplaces, or any location where she knew we'd be. She could not post about us on social media or make any public statements about us. She had 7 days to return any remaining keys or property belonging to Robert. The judge looked directly at Diana and told her that her divorce from Robert was legal and final. He said she needed to accept that reality and move forward with her own life. He said her continued insistence that she had some special claim on Robert, despite the divorce, showed a troubling disconnect from reality. He strongly recommended she seek professional mental health treatment. Diana started crying harder and saying the judge didn't understand. She said their connection was special and unique and nobody could see it except them. The judge said firmly that the court had made its ruling and she needed to comply with the restraining order or face criminal charges. Diana kept crying as the bailiff handed her a copy of the order. We left the courtroom with Jeffrey, Natalie, and Dimitri. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. Diana had legal consequences now and she couldn't just ignore them. Over the next few days, we heard through mutual friends that Diana had completely isolated herself. She wasn't answering calls or texts from anyone. Her family had tried to reach out and suggest therapy, but she'd told them that everyone was against her, and nobody understood her special connection with Robert. One friend said Diana insisted the judge was wrong, and the restraining order didn't change anything between her and Robert. I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness hearing about her reaction. I was relieved that we finally had legal protection and clear boundaries. But I also felt sad knowing that Diana was suffering, and seemed unable to accept reality. Robert said he felt guilty sometimes, but Roxana helped him understand that Diana's mental health wasn't his responsibility. He couldn't sacrifice our marriage and my safety to protect Diana from the consequences of her own actions. These consequences were necessary even if they were painful for everyone involved. Robert kept going to therapy every week and started making real progress on assertiveness and boundary setting. Roxana had him practice different scenarios where people might try to manipulate him through guilt. They role-played how to say no firmly without apologizing or explaining himself. He admitted to me one night that he felt lighter, like he'd been carrying Diana's emotions for years, and finally put them down. He said learning to set boundaries was hard, but also freeing. We started doing couples counseling together too, meeting with a different therapist who specialized in marriage relationships. We worked on communication patterns and rebuilding trust. I learned that I'd been holding back some of my feelings because I was afraid of overwhelming Robert. He learned that he needed to be more proactive about protecting our relationship, instead of waiting for problems to get bad before addressing them. The couples counseling helped us understand each other better and build a stronger foundation for our marriage. We were both committed to making this work and doing the hard work necessary to have a healthy relationship. 2 months after the restraining order was granted, Diana tested the boundaries. A mutual friend called Robert and said Diana had asked her to pass along a message. Diana wanted to know if Robert would consider mediation to heal their relationship. The friend said Diana seemed calmer now and maybe we should give her a chance. Robert surprised me by handling it perfectly. He told the friend immediately that any contact from Diana, even through a third party, violated the restraining order. He said if the friend passed along any more messages, he'd have to report it to the police, and she could face charges for helping Diana violate the order. The friend apologized right away. She said she had no idea Diana was using her and she wouldn't let it happen again. She felt terrible for even calling. Robert thanked her for understanding and hung up. I was so proud of him in that moment. The old Robert would have felt guilty and maybe even considered Diana's request. This new Robert protected our boundaries without hesitation or apology. He called Jeffrey to document the violation attempt, and Jeffrey said to keep a record of it, but that one incident through a third party probably wasn't enough to pursue criminal charges. He said if it happened again, we'd have a stronger case. A week after Jeffrey documented Diana's violation attempt through the mutual friend, Natalie called to invite us to a family dinner at her house. She said she wanted everyone together to talk about what had been happening, and her voice sounded serious in a way that made me nervous. Robert squeezed my hand in the car on the way over and told me not to worry, that his family needed to hear the truth. When we walked into Natalie's dining room, Robert's mother was already there along with his 2 brothers and their wives. Everyone looked uncomfortable, like they knew this wasn't going to be a normal family meal. Natalie had set the table with her nice dishes and made Robert's favorite pot roast, but the atmosphere felt heavy. We sat down and made small talk about work and weather for maybe 10 minutes before Natalie put down her fork and looked around the table. She said we all needed to acknowledge that Diana's behavior had been completely unacceptable for years, and that the family should have supported Robert's boundaries instead of staying neutral. Robert's mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin and admitted she'd always thought Diana was too controlling during their marriage. She said Diana would call her constantly to complain if Robert didn't do things exactly her way, and she'd seen how exhausted Robert looked by the end of their 15 years together. His mother apologized for not speaking up sooner, saying she didn't want to interfere in their marriage and thought it was between them. She looked at me and said she was grateful Robert found someone who helped him stand up for himself, instead of just going along with everything. Robert's older brother added that he'd noticed Diana still acting possessive at family events even after the divorce, but he figured it was Robert's problem to handle. His wife said Diana had actually cornered her at Christmas 2 years ago, and warned her not to introduce Robert to any single women, because he wasn't ready to move on. The whole table went quiet for a moment, and I realized how much Diana had manipulated everyone around Robert for years. His younger brother said he felt guilty for not taking the situation seriously when Robert first told him about Diana letting herself into his house. He'd thought it was weird but not dangerous, and now he understood it was actually harassment. The family spent the next hour sharing stories about Diana's controlling behavior they'd all witnessed, but never discussed openly. Robert's mother talked about how Diana would rearrange her kitchen when she visited, insisting she knew better ways to organize things. His older brother remembered Diana calling him to ask what Robert wanted for his birthday, instead of just asking Robert directly. Every story added to this picture of someone who couldn't let go of control even after the divorce was final. By the end of dinner, everyone agreed they should have said something years ago instead of avoiding conflict. The family acceptance and support felt like this weight lifting off both of us, knowing we weren't fighting Diana's delusions alone anymore. The weeks after that family dinner brought a peace I hadn't felt since marrying Robert. I could walk through our house without that constant tension in my shoulders, not expecting to find Diana in the kitchen or hear her key in the lock. Robert and I started establishing our own routines as a couple. Simple things like weekend grocery shopping together and cooking meals we both actually wanted to eat. He admitted one Saturday morning that he didn't even like eggs over easy that much, which made me laugh until I had tears in my eyes. He said Diana had decided that's what he wanted 15 years ago, and he just ate them every Sunday because it was easier than arguing. We started trying different breakfast foods and discovered he actually loved pancakes with blueberries, something Diana never would have made because she thought pancakes were too unhealthy. Robert began expressing opinions about things I didn't even know he had preferences about, like what temperature to keep the house or what TV shows he actually enjoyed watching. It turned out he'd been going along with Diana's choices for so long that he'd stopped thinking about what he wanted. We established new traditions that were ours alone, like Friday night pizza and movie marathons, or Sunday afternoon walks in the park near our house. The security system became just part of our normal routine, instead of this urgent necessity we checked constantly. I could relax on the couch without jumping at every sound outside, and Robert stopped looking toward the door with that worried expression whenever we heard a car in the driveway. 6 months after the restraining order was granted, Natalie called with news about Diana. She said a mutual friend had mentioned that Diana finally started seeing a therapist, and was apparently making some progress in accepting the divorce. The friend said Diana had been talking about moving to a different city for a fresh start, somewhere she wouldn't run into Robert or have constant reminders of their marriage. Natalie asked if we wanted her to find out more details, or maybe reach out to Diana's therapist. Robert and I talked about it that night and agreed that maintaining our boundaries was more important than Diana's recovery process. We didn't need updates on her therapy or confirmation that she was getting better. Robert said he hoped she found peace eventually, but it wasn't his responsibility to help her get there anymore. That conversation felt like another milestone in his growth, hearing him prioritize our marriage over his old guilt about Diana's feelings. We didn't reach out to the mutual friend for more information or ask Natalie to keep us updated. Diana's healing journey was hers to take, and we needed to focus on our own lives without her in them. Our marriage grew stronger through all the chaos, built on clear boundaries and honest communication we'd fought hard to establish. Robert learned to prioritize our relationship over avoiding conflict, speaking up immediately now when something bothered him instead of letting it build. I learned that sometimes love means fighting for your partnership even when it feels uncomfortable or mean. We still had the security system and the new locks that kept Diana out, and we'd probably always keep them. But now they felt like practical precautions instead of desperate defenses, and that difference meant everything. Robert's therapy with Roxana continued even after the immediate crisis passed, because he wanted to keep working on the patterns that had let Diana control him for so long. We did couples counseling too, learning better ways to communicate and support each other through stress. The foundation we built during those difficult months made us stronger than couples who never had to fight for their relationship. We knew what we were capable of protecting together, and that knowledge made us confident in facing whatever came next.